What's up, everybody? Awkward Anxious Jennifer here. And for those of you who saw my video the other day where I was having a hard time, I'm doing a little bit better. Still got a lot of stress in my life. I'm hoping a big thing has to happen tonight, and hopefully after that I'll feel a little bit better. Anyway, poor Mr. Scruffles is a wreck right now because not only are they still, you don't want to be in my video? Oh. Not only are they still working on the balconies right outside my apartment, there's also a thunderstorm approaching, so he's kind of a wreck right now. Anyway, this morning I saw that there was a new video on Chronically Jaquie's YouTube channel. Excuse me. That Jaquie's best friend Janice had edited and put up, and it was the footage of Judd and Harlow moving into the new house, not knowing at the time that Jaquie would never see it. So that kind of struck me hard, in addition to everything else going on right now. Just, you know, if you haven't seen the video yet, I'll link it up here. But, you know, every time Judd said things like, boy, it's a good thing Jack's not here right now because she would be having a hard time with all this mess and whatnot. And he would say things like, you know, oh, this is all going to be moved when she comes here and tells me where she wants to put it, and just knowing that that's not going to happen. That's tough, and I'm sure some of you are feeling the same things. So I got the idea that today I wanted to talk about the 5 stages of grief. Many of you have maybe heard about these before. Maybe a lot of you, like me, were kind of vaguely aware that there are these stages of grief, but don't know a whole lot about them. And maybe some of you have never heard about the stages of grief. So whether you're grieving the death of Chronically Jaquie, grieving the loss of somebody else in your life, or you could even be grieving a diagnosis or a chronic health problem, I'll address those too, because grieving is not just about death. It can be about grieving a part of you. And I've had to do that a few different times with things, like especially after I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. It's like, wow, this is a big part of me. I'm always going to have some of these problems that I deal with. It's always going to be a lifelong management thing. I'm always going to be on medication. I may not be able to do some of the things that I wanted to do because, you know, certain parts of my personality are probably always going to be affected by my bipolar disorder. So anyway, I wanted to talk about the 5 stages of grief a little bit. Anyway, so, people who are grieving do not necessarily go through the stages of grief in the same order or experience all of them. So, you know, some people go back and forth through all the stages. Some people only experience some of the stages. So just keep that in mind. Don't feel like if you're in the process of grieving something, oh, I'm grieving wrong because I haven't gone through this stage, or I'm not going through them in order. Don't worry about that. So usually the first stage of grief is denial and isolation. You know, that this, I can't believe this happened. This didn't happen. This person is not gone. My old life is not gone, you know. We might also think about, you know, life is meaningless. Nothing is of any value anymore. That to me also kind of sounds like depression, but the website I got this information from is pretty reputable. So I'll link everything I talk about in the description box below if you want more information. So the second stage of grief is anger, and anger might be aimed at inanimate objects, complete strangers, or friends or family. And it might not have anything to do with who or what you're grieving. It'll just hit you out of nowhere. And for me, that often hits me. I'll get very angry about, why can't I be better? Why can't I do better? Why do I still struggle with these things? And part of that is what I'm going through right now, just anger and frustration. Yeah, I guess I don't know if I'm necessarily still grieving my diagnosis, but yeah, anger can be a big part of it. Bargaining. And bargaining is not just, you know, the deals you try to make with God about, you know, if you do such and such, you know, or, you know, bring such and such back and I'll do this for you, or whatever. But it's also if only statements. Like, if only I had tried to be a better person toward this person who passed away, or if only I had done this, then my condition might not be as bad, or whatever. So bargaining is if only statements, as well as, deals with God or whatever. The fourth stage of grief is depression, and there are two different types of depression. The first one is a reaction to practical implications relating to the loss. Sadness and regret predominate this type of depression. So you're thinking about costs and burial, and then you start to think about, well, gee, have I spent enough time with the other people around me because they could die anytime? The phase may be eased by simple clarification and reassurance. We may need a bit of helpful cooperation and a few kind words. And the second type of depression is more subtle and maybe more private, and that's our quiet preparation to separate and to bid our loved one for farewell. Sometimes all we need is a hug. And the fifth stage of grief, can't talk today, is acceptance. And not everybody gets to acceptance. That's especially common in, that's the thunder, lovely. Where am I? That's especially common if a death is really sudden, like with Chronically Jaquie. It can be a little bit easier to reach acceptance if somebody has a terminal illness and you have time to come to grips with things. So not all people get to acceptance, and you might reach acceptance and then go back to another stage of grief. So that's, those are the 5 stages of grief as applied to anything, whether it's the death of a loved one or, receiving a chronic illness yourself, or having a family member receive a terminal illness diagnosis, or, chronic illness or whatever. So then I went to a website that was, or an article that was written by somebody who was accepting her chronic illness diagnoses and going through the grief process, kind of grieving her old life, that once she got her diagnoses, she had to accept that she's never going to have that old life again. Now, she was talking primarily about, putting all of her high heels into a bag for Goodwill, and kind of grieving the ability to wear heels due to her chronic illnesses. But there were a few really interesting things in that article, and I'll link that one down below too. And so when we think about the 5 stages of grief, many of us think the process, we think it's the process we go through when a loved one passes away. But like I've already mentioned, that's not always the case. But Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is the one who originally talked about the 5 stages of grief in her 1969 book on death and dying. And she actually wrote it based on her work with terminally ill patients. So, while it does also apply to losing a loved one, she wrote it kind of more specifically for, the acceptance, more thunder, of a terminally ill person, patient, whatever. And so Dr. Kubler-Ross stated that not only terminal illness patients go through these stages, anyone facing a particularly traumatic or life-altering event can. So that could be a chronic illness, a mental illness, whatever. Grief isn't limited. It has no limits. So some of you may be grieving the loss of Chronically Jaquie, or grieving your own diagnoses, whether it's a chronic illness or a terminal illness, or, the terminal illness of a loved one. And so I just wanted to say, it's okay. Whatever you're experiencing, whatever stage of grief you're in, there's no timeline on, you should be completely done grieving the death of your loved one within a week or 2. Or, you've had these diagnoses of this chronic illness for over a year. You should be over it by now. No, there's no time limit to grief. Grieving takes as long as it takes. So anyway, watching the video this morning just broke my heart. In addition to my own struggles, which if I didn't link them earlier, I'll link them now. That video where I had completely broken down, and I don't cry very often. So I cried more than a year's worth of tears at once. I don't know. I think I'm just rambling at this point. Feel free to share your own grieving experiences in the comments below, regardless of what type of grieving that is. And hopefully we can form a bit of a community in the comments and kind of all support each other through whatever we're grieving. And be kind to yourself. Be kind to others. More thunder, lovely. I, of course, have to leave in about half an hour for an appointment. So I am just rambling. I'm going to shut up. I hope you all have a great weekend. And I'll talk to you later. Bye. You hear the storm? Scary, huh? I know. Thunder's scary.